Good evening. Scotland's First Minister has told Sky News he's trying to find common ground with the parties that could bring about the end of his political career next week. Humza Yousaf triggered turmoil at Hollyrood when he dramatically ended the power-sharing deal with the Scottish Greens. And if the Greens back a motion of no confidence being brought by the Conservatives, Mr Yousaf will be relying on an old leadership rival to save his job. The First Minister has been speaking exclusively to our Scotland correspondent, Conor Gillies.
Hello, how are you all?
Putting on a brave face.
Show quite a bit of patience when I'm dealing with my opposition.
An embattled Humza Yousaf.
Despite the drama.
A career on the line, a government hanging in the balance.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
But your position would be untenable. Do you agree?
Planning to win.
In the face of that looming no-confidence vote that could prove fatal, the SNP leader has now written to his rivals. This political drama began to unravel on Thursday, triggered by the Greens being sacked from Humza Yousaf's power-sharing pact. And they are absolutely furious.
The mudslinging on this needs to stop.
That leaves the deciding vote in the hands of this politician, SNP defector Ash Regan, now part of Alex Salmond's Alba party. They're meeting this weekend to determine the fate of the First Minister.
The Greens have told Sky News this morning they will not engage with you. Are you going to be the First Minister propped up by Alex Salmond?
Well, let me say again, that would be really disappointing if that is the Greens' position. That would be, I think, a poor choice to make. So, of course, I have written to Ash Regan as well, and I look forward to speaking to her too.
Could we genuinely be looking at a Scottish election? Can we rule that out?
Can't rule it out. Can't rule it out.
And are you on an election footing then for Hollyrood election?
Well, as I say, we can't rule out an election.
1, 2, 3.
It may have been a warm welcome here in Fife, but there is disquiet among some senior SNP figures. Unease at the prospect of relying on old foes and how that could play out in the polls.
They'll pick up that, the government is having another problem, is having further issues. There looks like there's a lack of leadership and direction. And I don't suspect this will have much positive impact on at least in the short term, on the outlook for the SNP. What the First Minister will hope is that he gets through this, can reset the party and regain some of that support.
As the parties thrash out deals, the fallout may be felt across the country. A sign of the uncertainty, a battle that could go in any direction. Conor Gillies, Sky News in Fife.
The Prime Minister has told Sky News that claims the Rwanda plan is causing an influx of asylum seekers into Ireland is proof the plan is already working as a deterrent. Speaking to Sky's Trevor Phillips, Rishi Sunak said he believes other countries are now considering third country partnerships and the international community will follow where the UK has led. Our chief political correspondent John Craig reports.
More illegal migrants being brought ashore today at Dover by a UK Border Force patrol vessel, just days after Rishi Sunak's Stop the Boats legislation became law. Yet the Prime Minister has told Sky News the deterrent of his Rwanda policy is already working. He was responding to a claim by the Irish Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Micheál Martin that the Rwanda law means more migrants are leaving the UK and heading to Ireland.
What that comment illustrates is a couple of things. One, that illegal migration is a global challenge, which is why you're seeing multiple countries talk about doing third country partnerships, looking at novel ways to solve this problem, and I believe will follow where the UK has led.
Mr Sunak says his focus is on the UK and securing its borders.
The deterrent is, according to your comment, already having an impact because people are worried about coming here, and that demonstrates exactly what I'm saying. If people come to our country illegally but know that they won't be able to stay, they're much less likely to come.
Mr Sunak also said this week's tragedy in the Channel, in which 5 migrants, including a 7-year-old girl, died, was unacceptable. The PM, who's made stopping the boats one of his 5 pledges ahead of the general election, said his ambition was to stop all small boat crossings and end illegal migration. Refugee groups admit that the threat of being deported from the UK to Rwanda is driving migrants across the border from Northern Ireland into the Republic.
As long as there is a Rwanda policy and the Illegal Migration Act, which states that somebody can't lodge an application for asylum in the UK and have it considered if they enter in an irregular way, it's going to have knock-on effects on Ireland. That's plain to see.
Now that the Rwanda legislation has become law, the Prime Minister won't find it quite so easy to blame his political opponents in the Commons and in the House of Lords if it doesn't work. That probably won't stop him, though. The danger for Mr Sunak is that even if planes do take off for Rwanda this summer and some migrants head to Ireland, it won't stop the tide of illegal migrants crossing the Channel. John Craig, Sky News.
And you can watch our full interview with the Prime Minister on Sunday morning with Trevor Phillips tomorrow morning. That's from 8:30 a.m. Well, if Rishi Sunak thought his fortunes might be changing after finally getting the Rwanda plan through Parliament, he's been dealt another blow tonight after a former health minister defected from the Conservative Party to Labour. Dan Poulter, a frontline doctor in the NHS, says he made the decision because he can no longer look his colleagues, patients and constituents in the eye. Let's cross now to Downing Street and our chief political correspondent, John Craig. John, just how damaging will this be to the Prime Minister, given that Dan Poulter says he won't be standing at the next general election?
But he will be campaigning for Labour in the run-up to the election on the subject of health. And that's what's embarrassing for the Conservatives. On a day when the PM's claiming that his small boats policy is working, he's now got this terrible blow on another of his 5 pledges, cutting NHS waiting lists. And in his resignation salvo, Dr Poulter is saying that's one reason why he's going. He's saying that the government is playing politics with the junior doctors' pay strikes and so on, when it should be solving those disputes. He praised Labour's record on the NHS, and he said that the only cure now was for the Labour government. In his letter to the Prime Minister, Dr Poulter said this: "Working on the front line of a health service under impossible strain has left me at times struggling to look my NHS colleagues, my patients and my constituents in the eye. It is this that has led me to resign from the Conservative Party to focus on my work as a doctor, and at the same time I will be supporting the Labour Party to deliver a better NHS." Well, Dr Poulter has been MP for Central Suffolk and North Ipswich since 2010. Big majority at the last election, 23,000. No, he's not standing again, but there's been a fierce and angry backlash in his constituents, as you might expect. Both here nationally, the Conservative Party, one source has told Sky News that he hardly didn't turn up, wasn't doing his job properly in Parliament. Whereas back in the constituency, one angry councillor has said good riddance, another has called him the invisible man. So there is fury in Suffolk, there is anger at the top of the party. It's embarrassing for the Prime Minister. Labour, of course, are cock-a-hoop. Dr Poulter says on Monday he'll cross the floor and join the Labour Party. That doesn't happen very often, should be dramatic.
John, thank you. The government is considering sending troops to Gaza to help deliver aid. It's thought British personnel could be employed to drive lorries to and from the pier being built by the US, using a floating causeway to bring aid to the shore. Meanwhile, talks on a ceasefire continue, with Hamas considering Israel's latest proposal to end the violence and secure the release of the hostages. From Tel Aviv, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports.
In a rally in Tel Aviv, they had just watched Hamas's latest propaganda video shown to the crowd, parading 2 more hostages being held in Gaza. After 204 days of Israel's hostage ordeal, emotions are just as raw now as when this first began. Then the father of Omri Moran, one of the captives in the Hamas video, found the courage to address the crowd. Danny Moran urged his government to do more to give diplomacy a chance and bring them all home.
Show humanity and you will find our cabinet will be with you. I'm convinced Israel and all the nations of the world want to see an end to the bloodshed, especially the suffering of your nation. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the cabinet, please approve any deal, any executable deal. Take a decision now, now, now.
Passover should be when Jews celebrate their deliverance from past slavery. This week they were instead remembering the 133 still being held in captivity. Like Romy Gonen, whose mother Merav says the world must do more to help everyone in Gaza.
I think the Gaza people, the innocent ones, should receive help also from the world. This is the responsibility of the world to help those who need that, the helpless one. Also my daughter and the other hostages, they deserve to get the same support.
The effort to bring more aid to the people of Gaza is making progress. Israel released pictures of preparations to receive an American-built pier on the Gaza coast. On the same day, there have been reports Britain is considering sending troops to help secure the temporary port, raising questions about their safety. And there are mounting concerns Israel's preparing a new military campaign in the south of Gaza, in Rafah, just as there are signs of new momentum in negotiations towards a ceasefire and hostage release. There is growing impatience and frustration in Israel at the failure to bring them home. Feelings that erupted again on the streets of Tel Aviv. Crowds focusing their anger on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. The fear for many Israelis is their government is acting more for its own political reasons and survival than the welfare of the hostages, and its actions could jeopardise the fragile progress being made in negotiations. They are nervous. Renewed fighting could reverse momentum in the talks. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Tel Aviv.
There was a heavy police presence in central London today as both pro-Israeli and anti-war demonstrators marched in the capital. The protest went ahead despite the campaign against anti-Semitism cancelling its event over safety concerns. The group says it made the decision after receiving numerous threats and the risk to safety was too great. Martin Brandt reports.
There were insults exchanged and plenty of noise. But the pro-Palestine march in London passed relatively peacefully. Here, as marchers were confronted by a pro-Israel rally, the masked man was arrested on suspicion of a racially aggravated crime, causing harassment, alarm or distress to the counter-protesters. This placard, specifically the Nazi symbol, prompted a second arrest. It was the 13th such march through central London. According to Jewish leaders, each one stokes fear in their communities.
There are so many protests happening on a regular basis that I feel this kind of tension in the air.
My mum is 85 years old and she's petrified. But as young or relatively young people, I feel we need to make our presence felt and we have the right to be on the streets of London.
I'm not frightened at all. Why should I be frightened in my own city? I was born here. Why should I be frightened? They're not going to make me afraid.
Police estimated the marchers at around 10,000. Again, their call was for a ceasefire in the Hamas-Israel conflict and an end to UK arms sales to Israel. Protesters insisted there was no intention to intimidate Jews in the capital.
I march with lots of Jewish people who are here today, and they are clearly not intimidated in any way. So, yeah, I find it hard to understand.
I feel like we're marching for peace here. We're asking, to stop the violence, to stop the massacres, to stop the genocide. So I wouldn't see any reason why they'd fear that. It's not a religious thing for us here.
In the days before the march, police met Jewish leaders.
One of the main concerns of Jewish community leaders is that these marches have become too frequent. Protesters, they argue, have already made their point. The organisers insist they haven't yet achieved their aims, and the marches will continue.
In the police command centre, relief at a largely trouble-free march, but counting the cost of another major operation.
The total cost, we would say, is somewhere in the region of £38 million. So it's enormously significant. But the Met is a resilient organisation. We know the challenges and we know that people have a right to protest and to counter-protest. and we will continue to provide an effective policing response to keep people safe.
A planned protest by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism was cancelled the day before. Organisers said they had no guarantee of the safety of Jewish people. Martin Brunt, Sky News, Central London.
A British tourist is in a stable condition in intensive care after he was attacked by a shark in the Caribbean. Peter Smith was attacked just metres off the shore in Tobago. He sustained injuries to his left hand, left thigh and stomach in the attack by a bull shark, estimated to be 8 to 10 feet long.
We saw some people on the beach, and originally I thought, perhaps the gentleman or whoever it was had had a cardiac arrest, and I thought they were helping him. And then I saw somebody running down with a towel, and then I saw a dorsal fin come out of the sea, and I went, oh my God, it's a shark. And I saw, as it turned, I saw the tail come out as well as it swam off.
They went about waist deep to shoulder high water, so they weren't out of their depth. And I think their backs were turned, and they were just kind of lounging around, and nobody saw the shark coming, you know. And even while the shark was around and doing the attack, the other people in the water were physically trying to fight off the shark. So, but that is an attribute of a bull shark. That is one of their personalities.
Former Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein has been taken to hospital in New York for tests. It comes days after a court overturned his 2020 rape conviction, finding the judge in the trial made improper rulings. He's not a free man. He was convicted of another rape in 2022 and is due to appear in court again on Wednesday. ITV News presenter Raghi Omar has thanked viewers for their concern after he fell ill while on air last night. In a statement released today, Mr. Omar, who received medical treatment in hospital, said he was determined to finish the programme. He's now recovering at home with his family. And a gold pocket watch recovered from the body of the richest man on the Titanic has sold at auction for more than £1.1 million. It's the highest amount ever paid for Titanic memorabilia. The original owner of the watch, businessman John Jacob Astor, went down with the ship after seeing his wife onto a lifeboat. His body was recovered a week later. A popular influencer has been shot dead in Iraq. Ghufran Sawadi, known on social media as Fahadi, attracted hundreds of thousands of followers. But she attracted criticism and anger too, and was jailed last year, accused of undermining public morality. Daniel Henry reports.
On a quiet street in Baghdad, a man on a motorbike, believed to be pretending to be a delivery driver, did this to a young woman. Her name was Ghufran Sawadi, but on social media, she was known as Fahad. Her TikTok videos are full of life, which is why those who followed her are finding it so hard to talk about her death. Fahad's content clocked up thousands of views, but not everyone liked what they saw. Iraqi officials believed her content breached morals and traditions, so last year they put her in jail.
There's very little value to human life here, and especially women who have been degraded by society or looked down on as to not being modest or not behaving within the norms of society.
In a statement, Iraq's Interior Ministry confirmed a woman known on social networking sites had been killed by unknown assailants. An investigation is underway. But detectives won't be the only ones with questions. And the answers may be uncomfortable for some to face up to. Daniel Henry, Sky News.
When temperatures peaked at 20 degrees earlier this month, people thought spring had finally arrived. But with just days before the start of May, many of us are still reaching for our winter coats. And as Sky's Ashna Hurnag has been finding out, the unseasonably cool weather is also having an effect on the spring bloom.
So far, spring has been cloudy, drizzly, with a distinct absence of sunshine. Even with those conditions, the kaleidoscope of colours at this tulip farm has drawn in the visitors. But they are all carrying that extra layer.
Sometimes we look at the weather on the internet, it says it's going to be sunny, but at the end of the day, it's going to be 4 seasons in one day. But that's fine. That's English weather.
Still putting your heating on at home?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We try not to, but it just gets colder every morning.
This weekend, we actually talked about lighting our fire again. You know, we normally by now we would have cleaned it out, put some candles in it, you know, for the cooler evenings, but yeah, it's horrible.
So horrible, it's even forced some back into winter wear. Polar winds have plunged Scotland and northern England back into winter. Last night, Penrith in Cumbria dipped to -6 degrees. But in Scarborough, the rain didn't get in the way of fun at the beach. All in the same month that saw France set dozens of heat records. It was the UK's warmest start to the year that kick-started the tulip season here. 500,000 bulbs blossomed in record time.
The weather, the fact that we obviously had a slightly hot period just before we opened, and that meant that we could open slightly earlier, which is great. And the fact that it's been cold over the last few weeks has meant that the flowers, once they've bloomed, they're staying in really good condition.
It's hard to believe last week parts of England reached 21 degrees. Now the temperature is 6 degrees lower than average.
When we have air coming from the north, so it's got Arctic origins, it'll spill over the UK, and that's what's been giving us our cold temperatures. As we head into the later part of next week, we start to get more of a southerly direction, dragging that air out from the warmer conditions down towards the south, and we'll start to get that milder air moving over across the UK.
Brighter spells that'll make places like this sing. On the way as soon as next week. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
Time now to get all the latest sports news from Dave.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
The big reveal. In Paris, unveiling Olympic and Paralympic kits. This, the look for Team GB. Back to basics. Classic red, white and blue. Style simplicity from Adidas.
I've been in the process of getting ready for Paris for years, and then all of a sudden it becomes real, and it's all coming to life. So yeah, it's very exciting to get in the kit, and it just makes me feel very proud and think I really want to make sure that I get here.
This, a traditional look to Team GB, at a time when variations on flag designs by sports teams has stoked heated debates. Team GB hope this kit will put the traditionalist minds at rest with a very patriotic design and no tinkering at all with the Union Jack. There it is in red, white and blue. For athletes, it's the technical specifications that matter most to maximise performance.
I was actually consulted in the design process for the Paralympic side of things as well, and we thought about access features, and the team sort of really focused on sort of not just the sort of performance side of it, but also the functionality and the access side of it as well.
The specific needs of female athletes now a focus for designers.
I think as an athlete you want to feel at your best when you're out there competing, so you want to feel confident and, you know, comfortable in your kit.
Sometimes athletes feeling kits might be too skimpy.
Yeah, I think every athlete is completely different. I think it's about having, you know, a broad response from, you know, a large section of athletes to understand, well, how do we make the kit more appropriate for you, and how do you feel more confident in the kit that you wear? And I think the key thing is putting the athletes at the heart of that.
Athletes know how they'll look at the games, now just needing to secure places to compete in the summer. To deliver the 66 Olympic medals Team GB is projected to win. Rob Harris, Sky News, Paris.
Take me back to this time a year ago. What were you thinking about where you wanted to go, what you wanted to do after finishing the WSL season?
I was playing at Everton at the time, and obviously for the Danish national team as well, but I also felt ready for new adventures. I've always seen being a footballer as something I love to do, but also an opportunity to explore the world and live in different countries, different cities, and playing the game I love.
And then you went to the World Cup. Talk to me about that. What was that experience like? Because it must have just been incredible for you.
Yeah, it was just amazing being at the World Cup. I didn't know it was going to be one of my last experiences as a footballer, but I'm just really happy I got to play in it and experience what the women's game and where it's going.
And then what happened over the summer? Because it was a big, big life change, wasn't it?
I had some checks done, medical checks, because I was moving to a different club. And that was in Italy, so I went to do that, and that's when they found I had extra heartbeats. I signed for Portland in the meantime and was over in the US after a national team camp. And then the doctor called me and told me that I had to stop immediately.
What does it mean to have, like did you say an extra heartbeat? Or?
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. Amongst the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front of The Observer. Their headline, Tory MP defects to Labour in fury at NHS crisis. We'll be right back with that story and others. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they come in. But first, our top stories. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has told Sky News he wants to find common ground with the parties that could end his political career in a vote of no confidence next week. Rishi Sunak has told Trevor Phillips that claims of an influx of asylum seekers to Ireland are proof that the Rwanda plan is already working as a deterrent. But another blow for the Prime Minister after Conservative MP and former Health Minister Dan Poulter announced his defection to the Labour Party. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Observer leads on its exclusive story about Tory MP and former Health Minister Dan Poulter, who's defecting to Labour over concerns for the NHS. Conservative rebels are working on a plan to turn the party around in the wake of Dan Poulter's defection, The Telegraph reports. An exclusive in The Express suggests Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is promising to protect the pensions triple lock if he becomes Prime Minister. The Daily Mail's front page shows a Holocaust memorial boulder at Hyde Park was covered by a blue tarpaulin amid pro-Palestine protests. The Mirror reports that people smugglers are hiding migrants in World War II bunkers before loading them onto small boats to cross the Channel. The Times leads on a warning from Conservative whips to MPs that the government would abandon pre-election tax cuts in the budget if they backed calls for compensation for contaminated blood scandal victims. And The Sun's front page covers the recent cancer scare for Shirley Ballas. The Star has a story about astronaut Tim Peake's belief in millions of aliens. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Benedict Spence. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with The Observer, first of all, and this defection from Dan Poulter, former Tory MP and former Health Minister, quoted as saying, you know, he simply couldn't look patients and colleagues in the eye anymore because of the state of the NHS. Christina.
Yes, well, it's a little bit surprising it's taken him 14 years to acknowledge what's going on in the NHS. I remember interviewing him, actually, when I did a lot of campaigning and I did a big investigative campaign for The Independent some years ago about what was happening in terms of the culture of care. And I interviewed him then, and he seemed perfectly keen on what the Tories were doing. He claims to have had a kind of Damascene conversion. He says in this interview that it was basically the time he spent in A&E observing what was happening to people there that made him. Yeah, I don't think he's being insincere about that. That made him realise that it was unsustainable. But I do think almost anyone could have told him, has told him, in fact, that for many years now, the NHS has been in decline. Satisfaction levels with it are pretty much at a record low. Anyone going to A&E, generally speaking, will have a pretty bad experience, not because the workers aren't good, but because the whole system is kind of on its knees. So to me, I'm sure he thinks he is being sincere, but in the last few weeks or months of a Tory government, it looks to me like, kind of rather running after the stable horse has bolted. The horse running away after the stable door has bolted. I'm mixing my metaphors there.
Benedict, do you think he is being insincere? I mean, he says that I know that the Conservative government has been failing on the thing I care most about, which is the NHS and its patients. I mean, it's plausible that he's come to this realisation. Christina suggesting that 14 years too late.
Yeah, I think he is being insincere, and I think the fact that he's being insincere is shown by the fact that he's decided to join the Labour Party. You don't actually make that transition from the Conservatives to the Labour Party particularly easily. You don't do it over a single issue. I think if you're angry at the Conservatives, you get a little bit more vocal a little bit earlier, and I think that this is very relevant to Mr Poulter in particular. And then maybe you join a party that is on the insurgent, is actually going to cause some real pain to the Conservatives, which would be reform, or if they have nothing to do with your political allegiances, maybe you go to the other side, which is the Liberal Democrats, or maybe you sit as an independent. I don't think you join the Labour Party, which is about to walk into government and will take sort of great pleasure at this. I think it's very relevant that a lot of the noise that's coming out of the Conservative Party, especially the local branch of the Conservative Party from where he is an MP, is a great deal of anger, because there has been a sense for some time, not that this would sort of ever cross the sort of front pages of most newspapers, because this is a sort of a local issue, but that he is something of an absentee MP. He does not campaign. He doesn't seem to speak up very vociferously about local issues. And therefore, I think that a lot of people are quite irritated and do believe that it is insincere to see him then waltz across to the opposition benches, just before they're about to get into government, to just cause the government to black eye. If he felt so strongly about this, he has had, as Christina says, ample opportunity to do something about it, to say something, to speak up, to make a bit of a fuss about this. He hasn't done that. He's taken this opportunity at the very last moment. He says because he can't look at his own colleagues in the eye. Well, I'm sorry, but, again, this has come far too late in the day. And if you really cared so much about your NHS colleagues and what they thought of you, I think you would have left the Conservative Party some time ago. You don't just go, on this single issue, I'm prepared to sacrifice all of my so-called principles, whatever they may be, and cross the floor. And this is, I will also say, this is chickens coming home to roost for the Conservative Party. If you decide to stock your backbenchers with people who are not particularly ideologically driven, and who are able to leave your party at the drop of a hat because one thing doesn't quite go their way and it looks like they're going to lose their seat, well, then you are going to get a lot of people who, decide actually to leave you. And I think that this is something that Sir Keir Starmer would do well to touch upon, because he has been very thorough in his attempts to detoxify the Labour Party. Try not to have so many candidates in the next general election who are sort of associated with the hard left, the Corbynistas. Try to, present the party as quite moderate, quite mild. You don't want it to be necessarily then that you have people who are seen as almost paper candidates. They're there with a rosette. They're there and they're just there to represent the party, and that's it. That there's no sort of fortitude, no gravitas to these people. Because I don't think anybody is buying this about Dan Poulter, that he really cared so much that he waited, as he said, right until the very death of the Parliament to go, do you know what, guys? I'm not sure about
But
this.
Christina, we read that he has been talking to Labour for some months.
Yeah. Well, he's apparently not standing as an MP in the next election. So, I mean, in terms of cynicism, it's clearly not because he wants to have a career as a Labour MP or Labour minister.
Or in the House of Lords.
Or in the House, well, who knows, but who knows. He is apparently... Look, I am prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt in terms of advising Labour about health policy at this point. Also, Benedict, when you talk about, sort of insufficient ideological I think, you know, he's a one-nation Tory. I don't think ideology is necessarily a great vote winner for anyone, particularly when you look at the ideologues who've been in charge in recent years. What I do think is this guy has been claiming his 90 grand salary as an MP while not doing the job, and then working in the NHS and presumably being very well paid there. So I think most people would look at what he's earning and think, hang on, you know, where exactly are your principles?
I think Conservative voters and Conservative members who have put this man in there, and he has been an MP for a very long time, you know, perhaps it's not the most important for everything that you are sort of a dyed-in-the-wool Conservative on absolutely everything, but people did vote for him on the basis that he stood up as a Conservative MP. Members of his constituency, members of his local party campaigned weekly for him. And again, very vociferous, very angry about this, that he was never seen on the doorstep. Yeah, he never came. He didn't even tell them that he was making this decision. They were out campaigning for him today before this announcement came. I think a lot of people are justified in being very angry about
Let's talk about how the party are going to deal with this, and that brings us to the Sunday Telegraph. And apparently Tory rebels are on the warpath after this defection, and there's now in circulation a document entitled 100 Days to Save Britain. Part of this is to oust Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about whether they're saving the West or Britain.
That's 10 years to save the West.
10 years to save the West. So 3 weeks to save the UK, how many to save their own skins? It all gets very complicated. And Tory rebels on warpath could have been a headline on any day in the last 14 years, and it does get rather boring. And they do take themselves terribly seriously for a party that is not going to be in power for quite a long time. I just think most voters look at this and think, what ludicrous self-indulgence. There they are, sort of parading up and down thinking, we must find a new leader. It's all very Monty Python. Do they really think a new leader at this point is going to save them? Maybe they do, maybe... I mean, they don't. They don't. They know they're going to lose the next election. I don't know how they think it's going to be any kind of damage limitation to come up with yet another flurry of policies. Rishi Sunak is kind of, you know, wafting policies around all the time. Nobody notices, nobody cares. Actually, people just want this government to go. So it's just nonsense. It's just fiddling while Rome burns. And the sooner and there are rumours that this will happen imminently, and we will see, but the sooner that Rishi Sunak can put the country out of its misery and call an election, the sooner we can all have some faith in this country again.
Yeah, there are some rumours that it could be imminent as of Monday. We shall see whether that comes to fruition. But in terms of this plot to oust Rishi Sunak, and they're saying here that he could be replaced by Penny Mordaunt. I mean, is that serious?
No, it's not. It's sort of every week we hear that there's the latest plot to get rid of Rishi Sunak, and they don't have the gumption, they don't have the cojones to do this, actually. They should have done it years ago, frankly. It was very clear from relatively early on that Sunak was not, in fact, the person that was going to be able to revive their fortunes. If they wanted to do it, they should have done it earlier. And as Christina says, that would have been a huge gamble because everybody would have rolled their eyes and gone, oh, they're doing that again. But there was a window, I think, of opportunity to not win the general election, but to perhaps win back some ground, to perhaps not make the incoming defeat quite as bad as it's likely going to be. There have been opportunities. They've not taken. There's part of the problem with that is that actually a lot of the slightly more competent MPs who have seen the writing on the wall have decided, you know what, actually, I'm not going to stand. So a lot of the viable candidates who stood, you know, after Boris Johnson stepped down, there was a proper sort of leadership contest. A lot of people stood, and the more sensible ones were sort of filtered out very early for some reason. Those people then decided, you know what, I'm not going to stand to be an MP. And so now the top party's looking around going, well, good heavens, this leader isn't very good, but actually who's going to be sticking around long enough that is trustworthy that we could actually then put in place? So therein lies the problem. There were opportunities. I don't buy this idea that, you know, the second that Sunak got in, that was it, they had to stick with him. But the longer that they keep on leaving this and we keep on hearing, oh, there's going to be another plot, but it doesn't happen, it just makes them look weaker.
OK, let's move from the Conservatives to Labour. And in the Sunday Express, we read that Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to keep the pension triple lock. This being the guarantee that the state pension will rise in line with inflation, average wage increases, or by 2.5%, whichever is higher. Why are you smiling?
Because look, the column that Keir Starmer has apparently written for the Express is like a parody of a politician's column for a tabloid newspaper. There is barely a verb in it. It's just, you know, one noun, one punchy noun after another, very much geared towards the Express readership, which, of course, is what you have to do if you want to be Prime Minister. And you know, one thing I do admire Keir Starmer for is that he definitely does want to be Prime Minister, unlike other recent leaders of the Labour Party. And therefore, you know, he's doing a good job of getting there. And look, I personally don't think that there are lots of pensioners who are living in major poverty. There are lots of wealthy pensioners, but there are lots who are really, really struggling. But of all the priorities in this country at the moment, personally, I don't think that maintaining the triple lock is the highest, but it is a high priority to get the government, to get the Labour Party into government, and old people vote and younger people often don't. So, fine.
I think that's the key thing, is that he's not counting his chickens just yet. He's actually trying to cover as many bases as he can, and he can't guarantee that young people, who are famously electorally very fickle, will come out in the numbers that he needs. So actually going after the grey vote, as people say rather disparagingly, hey, they do turn out and vote, so it's a sensible policy to go for. Even if I agree with you, it's not actually a pressing priority at all.
Thank you. And that was probably 19 seconds. Just after Benedict and Christina. Thank you both. Coming up, more from the front pages, including this in the Daily Mail, showing a Holocaust memorial boulder in Hyde Park covered by a blue tarpaulin. That's amid a pro-Palestine protest. We'll be discussing that when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. Let's take a look at the Mail front page, and the photo is probably worth bringing up, because this story about a Holocaust memorial having to be covered up as the protest march took place in central London. Your thoughts on this, Benedict?
I mean, the first thing is, I think it's been done in a rather undignified fashion, which is sort of very typical of the Metropolitan Police, which is to just sort of cover it up and not necessarily think about that. I don't think it's a very dignified way to treat a memorial to people, but perhaps that's a slightly minor point. I think, honestly, the fact that we find ourselves in a position... Yeah, I have some sympathy with the police. Obviously, they have to try to prevent things from happening that would be negative. So, obviously, trying to put barriers in between people who might want to graffiti or attack a memorial is better than perhaps letting them do it and then arresting them after the fact. I continue to be very uncomfortable with the fact that we have marches every weekend, every other weekend, in which perhaps the best integrated ethnic minority community in this country, historically speaking, members of it, not all members of it, but some members of it certainly, feel that they cannot safely be near in the vicinity of, and in which police officers actively reinforce that idea, saying to them that they shouldn't necessarily be there on account of their appearance or whatever it may be. The sotto voce, the sort of, you know, the subtext being that it could cause an issue, that there could be violence. And we see people standing there with Hamas, a terrorist signs, who are actively surrounded by people. I am deeply uncomfortable that this is still going on. And of course, it's not the majority of the marches. Every time we have to say it's not the majority. But still, the fact that even within those ranks, there are still a lot of people, far too many people, who feel that that is an acceptable way to behave. In a post-Second World War European country, I think it is uncivilized. I think it is unacceptable that that is still going on. Whatever your political cause might be, I don't think you have the right to make your fellow British citizens, who are not, let's again, not Israelis, nothing to, you know, not people who are linked to that conflict, just linked by maybe tenuously ethnicity, religion, may not even be practicing. But to make those people feel unsafe and to potentially actively menace them, I think is disgraceful.
Christina, what are your thoughts, bearing in mind that, as evidence as one of our reports today, the report from the protest, that there are Jewish people who also go on these marches and are campaigning for a ceasefire?
I think the whole thing is a tragedy, actually. I think, obviously, what's happening in Gaza is a tragedy. What happened with Hamas on the 7th of October was a tragedy, and what has happened since has been a tragedy, and what has happened in this country in relation to integration and the culture of this country has been tragic. The area I live in, the next road along, has a number of mosques and synagogues. It's one of the most diverse areas of the country, and there is a very big Muslim community and there's a very big Jewish community. And it's, I have to say, having lived there for 25 years, that it's pretty harmonious. And I haven't locally seen signs of tension between the two communities, and that has been a kind of ray of hope in this horrible time. But in terms of, I do know people who've been on those marches. I absolutely understand why people are devastated about what's happening in Gaza, and I do, and as we know, the ICC are now indicting Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes, or they're talking about doing that. And I have been clear from the beginning that Israel had the right to respond to Hamas's absolute act of terrorism, act of absolute horror on the 7th of October. But I do think that the way that Netanyahu is conducting this war, and as it seems, allowing civilians to starve, is horrifying. I understand why people are angry about that, but I also think this is about Hamas, it's about Netanyahu, it's about the Israeli government, and it's about terrorist leaders of Gaza. It is not about ordinary people who, in this country, whether they be Jewish, Muslim, have any links with Israel or Gaza or not. People are not responsible. None of us is responsible for what Netanyahu has done. None of us is responsible for what Hamas has done. And one gets the impression when you see these marches and you see people waving banners saying from the river to the sea, which to a Jewish person, that is basically a genocidal slogan saying your country, which has a legal right to exist, should be wiped out. I think that is a totally provocative thing to do. And I think that is, you know, we wouldn't allow Holocaust denial. I think it's treading very dangerous ground. And Jewish people who are left-wing and who are supporting that, I think they should search their consciences very closely, because I would not go in a march where people were waving barriers like that, however strongly I felt about Gaza, and I do feel very strongly about Gaza.
We've just got a minute just to change story, just time to fit in this last story in the Telegraph. UK to deploy hypersonic missile by 2030. Benedict, take us in.
So this is... hypersonic missile is a missile that travels at Mach 5 outside of orbit. It's something that, rather hilariously, the United States about 2 or 3 years ago the Pentagon announced that they weren't going to pursue developing these missiles because the technology was too advanced. And then within 2 weeks, the Russians successfully test-fired one, and then within a month, the Chinese did the same. It is game-changing technology in the ability to launch nuclear missiles at things like carrier groups, at things like military bases, because they are too fast to intercept. The fact that we have found ourselves so far behind our key adversaries, Russia and China, and this is frankly very embarrassing. 2030 is too far away. The United States is already speeding up its process of developing them, having been caught on the hop. And you can bet your life places like Iran are looking at these as well and thinking, if they can do it, we can do it in a short space of time. 2030, with only a minor sort of £75 billion increase in our military budget, I think that's ambitious. I think there needs to be a lot more going into this, frankly.
OK, Benedict and Christina, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for the moment.